welcome to the
I watched the Russian.
in my opinion, one of the best. Hello and welcome to the newest episode of the Brussels Signal Horizon podcast. As many of our viewers and listeners know, Connor Tomlinson has been a guest on this show before when we talked about what's going on in Great Britain. Today we talk about an even bigger picture. So we're going to talk about what's happening in the UK, but of course we will also be talking about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And Connor is a very important and interesting conversation partner for this because you, Connor, are a member of Gen Z. Like, you are the very demographic that Charlie Kirk spoke to. And as we see in the media these days, I mean, particularly in the German-speaking world, the Telegraph dedicated an op-ed to this very issue. You have lots of boomers who talk about Charlie Kirk, and you can sense that they didn't know he was until 5 minutes ago. Now, I know that you have met him, that you are very familiar with Turning Point USA, with Turning Point UK. So you're not somebody who just heard his name last week. You're actually very familiar with his work. So from your perspective, what can you tell us about his work, what he did, what he meant for Gen Z, what he meant for your work, and how you would put the assassination and its potential consequences into broader perspective?
I don't think that President Trump would have won a second term without Charlie Kirk, given the significant swing among not just young men, but even young women towards the right. Ahead of the 2024 presidential election, there was a gender polarization gap prophesized by everyone from Newsweek to the New York Times that said there was going to be, 58-point separation between men and women aged 18 to 30 between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And that gap mercifully didn't materialize because they underestimated, in part, the role that Charlie Kirk played in persuading, through polite and compassionate conversations, default libs on college campuses to come over to President Trump's side. And he was by far the most viewed TikTok creator on the right, especially among that age demographic, in the lead up to the election. He continued to tour college campuses and have conversations with people with whom he fundamentally disagreed. He allowed them to jump to the front of the line, like Ben Shapiro used to do when he did his college campus tours too. That's where he took his inspiration. And he had very compassionate conversations with women who had had abortions or were suffering from some form of sexual or gender confusion thanks to trans ideology. And for this reason, he was killed. He was one of the most moderate, one of the most honorable, one of the most moral people in this space. As far as I know, everyone who worked with him, had the privilege of meeting him, me included, has nothing but good things to say about Kirk. He didn't have a concealed private life where he had a drug habit or an extramarital affair, unlike plenty of people that I'm sure you and I have both met in politics. Ralph, meeting Charlie Kirk did not leave you feeling soured or despondent about the future. If anything, as I said to him, you felt like you were sitting across from a future American president. And the fact that America has been robbed of a good man, a future president, the fact that his wife has been robbed of her husband, the fact that his children, who mercifully I hope were too young to remember seeing it, but were robbed of their father in front of them, is a grievous loss to his friends, his family, his country, and the broader right-wing movement. Now, as far as Gen Z goes, I mean, they do need leadership figures. I don't see anyone on the horizon as an obvious replacement to Kirk, given how multifaceted he was. He ran the largest single successful youth organization movement in America. He founded it at 18. He ran it for over a decade, and he built it up to be an election-winning engine. He also did a 3-hour radio show every day. He flew around the country with unquenchable energy to engage in these conversations. And I don't know anyone who currently exists that can do all of those things at once. There are great political polemicists like Michael Knowles and Ben Shapiro and even John Doyle, who are all ready to fill the shoes in terms of doing political organizing or doing a radio show, but who all don't quite fit the bill like Kirk did. Kirk was the avatar of like our guy, self-made, Christian conservative, young, energetic, and highly capable. And I hope that other people will be encouraged to come out of the woodwork seeing Charlie's death. I also fear that lots of people are going to be deterred, because the media response to Charlie's death is one of the most repugnant, morally inexcusable acts I have lived through. So, as we know, for the last 10 years, American Democrats, the broader left, the Antifa terror cells in all of our respective countries, especially in Germany, Sweden, and the UK, have been encouraging violence against their political opponents. They've been doxing us. They have been smearing us, labeling us as fascists, racists, and Nazis, and given those are the nadir of the post-war moral order, that justifies violence against you. If you truly believe that someone else is the second coming of Adolf Hitler, then aren't you a hero for taking them out? That is the mentality. And so by smearing the likes of Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk and all of their supporters as fascists and Nazis, you are encouraging violence against them, especially among the most deluded of your listeners, the most febrile and mentally deranged people that tune in and are hypnotized by the propaganda about an imminent trans genocide and systemic racism they hear on cable news and from the communist streamers on Twitch. And so I fear now that in the vacuum of Kirk's leadership, in this space where we all feel we have a bounty on our heads, that people are going to be quieter. I would encourage that they're not. I would encourage they continue to take the risks, but I understand why people won't. And I think a lot of people woke up the day after Charlie Kirk's death to see the celebration on social media among doctors, teachers, members of the military, to see the New York Times use Charlie Kirk's obituary to accuse him of racism, sexism, and spreading misinformation, to see Slate, to see The Nation, to see Pink News, all dancing on his grave, writing things like, well, evil people had kids too, we shouldn't feel bad about it, comparing him to Joseph Goebbels. I think people realized, oh God, the most violent possible act could befall me, and they will not only justify it, they will call for its repetition. And so these people, by making excuses for Kirk's murder, want to see it happen to me too. And this is not just a minority of people. It is a minority of the population on the whole, but it is still thousands, possibly even millions of people in the US and the UK and the Anglosphere in Europe. And so a lot of people are now realizing we have to snip the purse strings of this leftist terror network. We have to deprive the Radio Rwanda of the Democrat Party in the US and our respective media apparatus in the UK, who have also celebrated Charlie Kirk's death, of a platform. We have to make sure that people celebrating his death and encouraging violence are not in positions of influence over children, over the elderly, over the defense of our country. And we have to figure out whether or not we can live alongside in the same country with people who want to wish us dead because we have conversations. I'll finish by saying this. There are three groups of people. There are the likes of Charlie Kirk, who believe in what he stood for and had conversations like he did. There were the people that went to the front of the line during his debates, who don't believe a single thing he said, but believe that discourse is the way that we can resolve our disputes. And that's still, I hope, a majority of people. But as J.D. Vance pointed out in his closing speech when he hosted Charlie Kirk's show in his honor, there is a third group of people. There's a group of people who equate speech with violence and respond to violence in kind. And if we just relegate our response to those people to more speech, like Charlie did, we will end up like Charlie. That is not encouraging street violence. Far from it. I don't want to see another Charlie Kirk as long as I live. I fear, however, that there will be more people who suffer the fate of Charlie Kirk if the likes of the Trump administration do not use their lawful monopoly on force to crack down on these leftist terror networks, to prevent people from slandering their political opponents as fascists, Nazis, and racists, doxing people, putting a target on their back, and funding terror networks like Antifa and BLM. If they do not deprive this network of room to maneuver and funds, then we will get more people, more of our friends, more of us, killed in front of our families live on television. And we shouldn't have that happen.
I mean, maybe we can dive into this a little bit more, because I think you laid out the events quite nicely and its consequences. But if you also look at three other elements, so one thing that you had this Discord channel. So the current investigation where it stands is that at least potentially more people knew about the plans of the assassin. Again, speculation here, but there seems to be some evidence at least that it is possible. So you have these, as you said, like these networks, these decentralized networks that take place on these internet platforms. Secondly, however, I would also add to this, you had the New York Times that then gives Hassan Piker the space to write an op-ed, somebody who has, and by the way, this is all out in the open. This is not Connor and myself making something up. Like everybody who, you just have to go on YouTube and look it up, who has been speaking about, I think, drenching the streets in the blood of the capitalists and things to a similar effect. And they get space in what was once called, kind of the respectable public space like the New York Times. And then you have a third element, which I would also be interested to hear speak to. Do you think that one part of the reaction is because the left has been seeing that they're losing ground? And as you so eloquently described Charlie Kirk's work, is that this was not just some YouTuber or some podcaster who was assassinated. This was, as you said, somebody who was absolutely central to Donald Trump winning the election in 2024, somebody who at some point would have run the Republican National Convention, or maybe, he was only 31 years old, maybe at some point would have run for the office of president himself. So that the kind of relief you can sense, or the justification on the left, is also because they say, okay, this was a person that could have been a political heavyweight, and it was taken out. So you have like the unofficial networks, the official networks, and then almost the after the fact justification for having taken out a future major political figure.
So as far as these decentralized networks operate, some operate out in the open, as we can see on Blue Sky. They're openly calling for killing J.K. Rowling and Ben Shapiro next. But the reason they've all retreated to Blue Sky is because they proactively want to be in echo chambers. The problem with Twitter is that it was an echo chamber because it banned all the right-wingers before. As soon as the right-wingers were let back on the platform and were allowed to post in community notes correcting leftist lies, were allowed to be in the mentions of leftists, even when they could turn off their comments, they were still getting ratioed in the quote tweets. Because they couldn't stand up to scrutiny, they retreated to an ever-radicalizing rampart that is Blue Sky. And on Blue Sky, you have gotten leftists who have said that Tyler Robinson, the alleged killer of Charlie Kirk, was a right-wing groyper. Now, first of all, the groypers themselves, Nick Fuentes called to vote for Kamala Harris last cycle around. He was busy promoting Gavin Newsom for a short while to make Vance feel the heat over Israel. Nick is not in the MAGA coalition necessarily. And this is not even to start a flame war with the groypers, because I'm not interested in that right now. Like, we need to unify against our common enemy that is currently killing our guys. We can resolve our differences about foreign and domestic policy and which candidate should be president or the like later, okay? But they were busy in their echo chamber deluding one another on Reddit, on Blue Sky, on Discord, that they had no culpability for this, while also celebrating it as a win. So you cannot deal with these people's cognitive dissonance. And we covered before, Ralph, in the immediate aftermath of the election, how Kamala Harris's campaign had weaponized Reddit, breaking its laws, and then rerouted Reddit threads into Discord channels, and then spewed it out onto X when they were still there, to create false community notes and mass flagging campaigns to create the impression that Kamala Harris had momentum. And this was just a few deranged activists that lives permanently online, likely Twitch moderators, often Reddit moderators, running Discord servers, and weaponizing, like social media bot campaigns, swarming tactics to shame conservatives, to demotivate them, and to derank their presence on social media. What we actually found out after the election is that X, it turns out, is pretty broadly representative of what the majority think, because Trump won the popular vote. We were worrying, is X itself an echo chamber? No, it turns out that most people are sensible. Most people don't want gay race communism. They don't want to see their political opponents assassinated. However, in these festering corners on Reddit, on Blue Sky, and on Discord, that is very much the case. And Discord themselves are dishonest actors, because after Dylan Butler committed a school shooting in Iowa and killed a 6th grader and the principal before killing himself, he sent to a Discord chat word that he was arming up in the bathroom and preparing to commit the shooting. And Discord had flagged the chat to the FBI at one point, but hadn't passed along his username specifically, and was acting very coy when I believe it was NBC were investigating it at the time. Discord then, in this shooting, had said Tyler Robinson did not use Discord to organize the shooting. That is either dishonest or very slippery language, because he certainly used Discord to inform a chat full of up to 20 people that he was the culprit. We don't know who those 20 people are, but we have seen multiple pseudo-anonymous trans activist Twitter accounts gloating before Charlie Kirk was shot that they knew something was coming at UVU. Those people are being investigated, and I wouldn't be surprised if we found out there were co-conspirators at least cheering this on, or helping with the rifle drop, or helping plan the vantage points, or something. There was also his roommate, boyfriend,
and that, just real quick, just as a quick, and that makes it a terror cell, right? You can no longer say, oh, well, this was just a deranged individual who woke up one morning. It's that if you communicate with people, if you share plans, and I think also there has been, maybe you can talk to this just a little bit. There is now a debate about the last messages between him and his, what you were just starting to talk about, and his live-in partner, roommate, whatever you want to call it, and so there are two suspicions. One suspicion is that this was fabricated by the FBI. The other suspicion, which is something that Matt Walsh has been writing, which I think is more plausible, that this is an attempt to protect the live-in roommate from being an actual co-conspirator. So what's your take on this broader issue?
Yeah, whether that stilted conversation was authentic or a fabrication.
Yeah.
I don't think it matters because the roommate was informed the day before that Tyler turned himself in that he had committed the shooting. So even in this exchange, which may be fabricated, the roommate is still implicated for not doing his duty for reporting his boyfriend to the police. And it has been confirmed by the family members, multiple family members and friends now, that this is his trans-identifying boyfriend who was on hormone replacement therapy, who was posting anti-Trump stuff on Reddit, who seems to have been in a weird furry role play with the shooter, hence the furry memes written on the side of the bullet casings. And this is the most disgusting part, by the way. All those people on Blue Sky gaslighting people, saying on Twitter and Reddit that this was a right-wing groiper. Groypers do not accuse Charlie Kirk of being a fascist. The Groyper War was launched against Charlie because he was seen as insufficiently right-wing. He was inviting, I think his name was Rob Smith, a black conservative, conservative gay guy, on stage and saying that he had no problem with legal migration, just illegal. So they were pressuring him to be more right-wing, especially on things like Israel. It wasn't that they were accusing him of being a fascist. So Tyler, the alleged shooter, seems to be a deranged trans activist with a transgender boyfriend and may have alerted other co-conspirators to the shooting ahead of time and at least told his boyfriend he was guilty of the shooting before he handed himself in when he was planning to commit suicide, according to his own father. So these people are all implicated. Other people that should be implicated, as J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller have suggested on maybe RICO charges, are the broader left-wing terrorist network and the people that operate to permit maneuvering room for violent. Mainstream publications endorse their political radicals, who themselves weaponize terminally online freaks with little to lose because they have often sterilized themselves into being inspired to commit violence because they think they're on the brink of a trans genocide. There's direct connective tissue between the leftist establishment and their radical foot soldiers who now have shot Charlie Kirk. The third point about this, as you said, the reason Charlie Kirk was targeted was actually because he wasn't that much of a radical, because he was polite, because he seemed to have been third or fourth in line to the Trump throne. And everyone knew it, including J.D. Vance, who owes a large part of his senatorial and therefore vice presidential career to Charlie Kirk. To all the people in the administration who Charlie Kirk forwarded their CVs to President Trump and Susie Wiles when they were appointing members. People knew Charlie, they respected him, they liked him, and he would absolutely have made an excellent politician, if not president, one day. And the reason they shot Charlie is actually because he was effective. And the reason that they have chosen the wrong target and provoked the worst possible bear in the likes of Stephen Miller, who is grieving but is not letting sadness overtake him, is letting righteous anger overtake him. The reason they chose the wrong target here is if they had targeted, and I say God forbid here because nobody should know what Charlie Kirk, but if they had targeted Candace Owens or Nick Fuentes or Tucker Carlson, the right would not be so unified in denouncing it. There would have been people going, well, are we surprised that crazy people took a shot at them for what they said about Israel, for example? Now, I would have condemned that too. Absolutely. But the reason Charlie Kirk is such a unifying figure is because he was beloved, he was respected, and he had broad appeal because rather than just talk about politics or his particular hobby horses, he went and appealed to people on a personal level and made more lasting converts. When he spoke to young people on the college campuses, he was saying, there is clearly something wrong with your life in that you are miserable, you are mutilating yourself, you are not in a relationship, you are far from God and tradition, and I wish nothing but the best for you. I will pray for you. When he went on that odious show, the Whatever podcast, where usually rhetorical pugilists just go on to insult OnlyFans girls, and OnlyFans girls goes on to flog their wares. Charlie Kirk went on there and described how much worth it was to his wife, who was a former beauty queen, who he just, talked into marrying him. Smooth as butter, the man was. He's described just how wonderful it was to come back home to his wife and his daughter, and eventually his 1-year-old son, at the end of the day. And all those girls were just transfixed. They went from being primed to be hostile to him as a judgmental Christian conservative to dreaming basically one day that they could have the same thing. And Charlie actually wanted the same thing for them, despite their unhealthy lifestyles and the perpetuation of an industry that has ruined the lives of many young men. Charlie was a great unifier, and they killed him for that because he was far too effective.
Isn't that the thing, right? Exactly what you just described, that in a sense, if we put this in broader perspective of the left strategy, it is the normalization of the radical and the supposed radicalization of the normal. Because exactly what you just said, if you look at the videos, if you look at the things that Charlie Kirk did, this man was not a radical. I mean, these are, most of his positions are 80-20 positions. Also, when they say, he was a religious radical, but he himself said, even though he himself is a practicing Christian, he always wants to make sure that his arguments are also based on reason, so that they can win an argument without reference to God, despite him himself having a significant chunk of his work dedicated to God's work. And we live in this absurd world now, and you experience this yourself, is where you say things that pretty much every middle of the road individual would see as completely normal. Again, the things that Charlie Kirk said, they are being described as, abnormal, as radical, as fascist, neo-Nazi, well, all the terms we hear. Whereas some guy who thinks he's a humanized or anthropomorphized cat and is into taking hormone blockers, everything, that is the new normal. And you know what I'm saying is this idea that something that is completely normal is supposedly, according to the left-wing media and the New York Times and others, that's the radical position. Whereas radical, and I would have to say, in some areas like what you just described about the live-in boyfriend or whatever it then was of the shooter, I mean, somewhat perverted, if you will, in the very meaning of the word. Lifestyle choices are seen as normal. So do you think that's a broader attempt by the left, and we talked about this many times also in private, as an attack on, let's say, the pillars of our civilization, to denormalize the things that were for such a long time perceived as normal and were the basis, of course, of the societies and civilizations that we live in?
So people think that the terms left and right are antiquated and they don't apply anymore because they originated in the French Revolution when the house was divided between those who sat on the right and stood for Christianity and monarchy, so therefore faith and hierarchy, and those on the left who went for egalitarian revolution. And I think that perfectly sums up the modern left-right dichotomy. It's not, as it was in the Cold War, a dispute between marginal tax rate cuts and capitalism versus funding public services through socialism, with a little bit of genocide apologia for the USSR thrown in, of course. No, this time is it about exclusivity, hierarchy, and order versus chaos, the pipe dream of an egalitarian utopia based on John Lennon's Imagine, and affirmation of immoral, vicious deeds to quiet the ailing consciences of those who commit and perpetrate them. And so Charlie Kirk represented exclusivity. Yes. He represented hierarchy. Yes. You need those things in order to properly order your life towards the good. Utterly unalloyed freedom, without judgment from those who love you, is a purely destructive thing. The people that have affirmed Kirk's killer and his boyfriend and their network of suspected trans activists have enabled these people to become self-destructive and therefore outwardly destructive. No, it isn't good to be a furry. No, it isn't good to be a transsexual. No, it isn't good to wish violence from the dark corners of the internet as a shut-in against your political opponents and never interact with them and treat them as fellow human beings engaged in the same prospect of trying to solve problems about your civilization. None of these things are healthy. None of these things are good, but they are being encouraged by one side. They are being discouraged by the other. They're being discouraged by Charlie Kirk, even in polite conversations with his political adversaries who saw him as less than human when they stepped up to the microphone and walked away wondering what was wrong with them. And so this is the great thing that people are confronting now with these three categories. We can live with category 2. Charlie Kirks can live alongside good faith liberals who are committed to solving their problems through discussion. But they cannot live alongside demented leftists, race communists, people who treat criminals as victims, and the people that condemn criminality as the perpetrators. The reason I mention that, the Ukrainian refugee, Iriana, who was stabbed to death by DeCarlos Brown Jr., a 15-time repeat offender with schizophrenia who was let out because of the permissive criminal policies in American cities like North Carolina, often funded by George Soros-backed district attorneys. When he stabbed her to death, when the CCTV footage was released of this innocent woman being stabbed in the neck and bled out while her fellow passengers watched and filmed it, her murderer said, "I got that white girl," twice. And Charlie Kirk said this is a racially aggravated attack, which has been encouraged by the anti-white racism, preached by the Democrat Party during the BLM riots of George Floyd in 2020, that has been encouraged by Black Lives Matter, who, the day before Charlie Kirk's murder, put on Instagram, "Black people have a right to violence." And when he said this, Van Jones went on television and said, Charlie Kirk is spreading racial resentment and he is the true danger to the United States. You cannot live in a country with people who will make excuses for murder, whether it's Charlie Kirk's, whether it's Rihanna's, because when it's yours, they will also make excuses for it. And so the reason that this is happening is because the left have bought into this idea of egalitarian human nature, of the blank slate. And it's taken on an especial power after the atrocities of the Holocaust and the Second World War, because as someone we both admire, Yoram Hazony, has pointed out, that the lesson of Auschwitz was not that people should have states to defend them from an imperialist power that invades them. Instead, it was, well, Hitler believed in Germany, therefore anyone who believes in their country, their heritage, their identity, and their history, anyone who expresses a preference exclusively for something, is indistinguishable from Adolf Hitler, and so we must be open societies, which is where George Soros' foundation got its name from Karl Popper's The Open Society and its enemies. And so the worst thing you can be is a racist, a fascist, a Nazi, and those terms have been inflated beyond all proportion. And they've been applied to the likes of Charlie Kirk. And all that means now is not believing in the blank slate, not believing that literally every single human being is indistinguishable from each other. And the only reason inequality exists, the only reason cultural differences exist, the only reason education outcomes are different, the only reason that we don't have as much money as one another is the hidden hand of oppression somewhere. And that hidden hand is, of course, white, straight, and male. That hidden hand is Christian. That hidden hand was Charlie Kirk's, and that's why he was shot through the throat. We have to abandon this delusion of the blank slate before more people get killed.
Is another element also that we are increasingly, because I think you spoke very eloquently to the question of with whom can we live in, or let's put it this way, what kind of groups can coexist or even interact productively in a society? And what struck me after this is that there really seems to be a growing number of people that live in separate realities. When you just described it, I saw a recent poll, I think about 23% or slightly more of Democrats believe that the assassin was a right-winger. So as yet, I mean, the evidence I think is now pretty clear that it was not, but it's this alternative reality that has been created. Or you mentioned what happened in Charlotte, in North Carolina, with the Ukrainian refugee. I mean, we have been force-fed for decades now the myth that there is like raging white rage. There are raging white people out there who are just want to get their pound of flesh from the black community, and you have to be very careful because there are all these white killers out there targeting black people. But if you look at the action, I'm just talking about the empirical evidence. I mean, it's quite clear that black on white violence is significantly higher than white on black violence. Yeah, I mean, the highest number of violence is always taking place within ethnic groups. But if you look on intra-ethnic violence, right, it is a simple fact that the likelihood of a white person becoming a victim of a black person is higher than the other way around. And even I can feel myself, right, by saying something that is objectively true, I have this queasy feeling that even stating something that is correct, that what am I doing here? Right? Am I exposing? Am I racist? Am I saying this because I have some subconscious motive I'm not aware of? And I think the same if we want to shift a little bit gears also to the UK. Do you think this also played a role in the rape, torture, and grooming gangs? That even though the evidence was in front of the authorities' eyes, that they couldn't speak to it because they said no. Like in truth, we must not forget that even though these Pakistani rape gangs do horrible things, at the end of the day, they are victims because the perpetrator can only and always be, as you said, the white Christian male or the white Christian majority population.
So connecting this to the Gen Z point, I think it's very important. The reason the myth of the blank slate is actually breaking down in a dangerous way is because of the camera phone. It's the same reason that the narrative around Iriana's murder was unsustainable for the left, because we had footage of him saying, I got that white girl, inventing that she had called him the N-word, exploiting racial tensions as a form of self-defense, and killing her for no conceivable reason. And this was a very clear crime that fits a pattern in America where, despite being a minority of the population, black men commit the overwhelming number of murders, both per capita and in absolute terms. Black women have a higher rate of murder than white men. That is absurd. And the fact that you feel uncomfortable about saying that, I recognize it, because there has been the sword of Damocles held over our head of cancellations for noticing facts for decades now.
Yeah.
But it's also, and I think this is something that is rooted in perhaps a place of compassion, just saying it makes you pessimistic about the solutions. Now, I would say that you don't have any solution without recognizing the truth and by maintaining a polite fiction. Like, I don't know why this is the case. I don't know why rates of fatherlessness in the black community are so high across countries. I don't know why rates of violence are so high. I know it is a problem and that it needs to be addressed within those communities, but you don't address it by denying facts first. And the reason the blank slate is breaking down badly is because it's breaking down into two camps, especially among Zoomers. This is why lots more Zoomers are trending right-wing, especially young men. They are seeing these videos time after time of black crime, of open ethnic contempt displayed on social media. For example, when a Sikh illegal immigrant did an illegal U-turn in Florida and killed a family of 3, before it was revealed that family of 3 were Haitians and we thought they were white Americans, Indians around the world raised $1 million for his bail. They made videos with their faces to it saying it was just a mistake, he should be allowed to stay in the country. And they were gloating about the deaths of white pedophiles and white nationalists. They were bestowing like seething ethnic rage against white people as a collective. And so we realize now that there are peoples who hold historical ethnic grudges against us when really, me and you, we just sort of take people as we meet them. We can befriend people of any skin color, right? Most people around the world don't think like that. The other way it's breaking down is largely among left-wing activists. Liberal women still believe in the blank slate. They still believe that literally everyone can live in an egalitarian utopia. We can all hold hands and we can be, as Marx once said, herdsmen in the morning, hunters by the evening, fishermen by nighttime, and lecture as to our heart's content. But there are lots of ethnic minorities who exploit this unilateral bleeding heart liberalism for ethnic in-group interest. And they just see things as us and theirs. And Black America, it really does believe that. You've seen this in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk, where they're just inventing quotes depicting him as a Confederate racist. And they are now walking up and spitting on the vigils, celebrating about his death, gloating and saying racism means that he is justified in being killed. And they see America, white and black America, as an us v them. And you cannot have a country like that. That is not all, of course. Ben Carson doesn't think that way, but exceptions do not disprove rules, sadly. And there is a lot of ethnic tension building in our respective countries. And the same thing is, of course, as you mentioned, in the UK with the grooming gangs. This was a racial and religious aggravated crime. They branded women on girls, they branded children with M for Muhammad. They nailed their tongues to tables. They inserted bottles of boiling water inside their orifices. So they did this because they called them white slags, white whores. Young Asian, Pakistani, Muslim men were quoted by pro-Muslim organizations blaming pornography for why white girls should be denigrated. It was in the 2013 report with the Muslims Women's Forum or something like that. In 2016, the head of the Ramadan Foundation said that the Pakistani community knows about this, but they hide their heads in the sand because they don't want to be, quote, seen as siding with the white enemy. It is an us v them mentality. This is something that Taj Hargay has said is preached in the mosques and madrasas. They see the girls as no better than chewing gum on the road. They see them as worthy of abuse because they don't share their ethnicity, they don't share their religion, they are outside the ummah, they dress immodestly by Muslim standards. This is why people smuggling gangs advertise on TikTok, on Instagram. Until very recently, the government have been cracking down on this. But it was the case between 2023 and 2025 when I broke the story. They were filming girls on nights out, drunk in states of undress by Islamic standards, and cutting them with footage of men breaking over the channel, breaking under the border fence into Poland, burning down churches in France, depicting Europe as a place where you can plunder and sexually assault white women to your heart's content. And that's the reason men were paying people smugglers to come over from the Islamic world into Europe. They see our women and girls as an ethnic outgroup ready for sexual exploitation by the men who are violent and go-getting enough to go do it. And what we are realizing is we cannot live with people that think that way. We can live with the handful of people from other cultures and other countries who come over and join our national tribe and think like us. But that is not the majority of those countries. Otherwise, those countries would be indistinguishable from our own. And unfortunately, thanks to ideology, thanks to the infection of liberal young women, and in Tyler's case, liberal young men caught in the spell of perverse fetishes and trans ideology, that is increasingly the case for lots of people in our own societies. And so what do we do about that? Honestly, I'm worried. The only thing you can do is fill asylums with people who are mentally deranged to the point of violence and hope to rehabilitate them and reintroduce them back into civilization. Pursue a kind of post-1945 Japanese de-radicalization program that worked in Japan. It wasn't nearly as punitive as the denazification program was to, for example, innocent children in Germany and Austria. Or, unfortunately, you're going to have to bring back the non-violent punishment of the ancient world of banishment, because you cannot live with people who wish to do you harm and are not willing to listen to reason. There is only one side promoting violence, and the other side who want to be left alone and live in peace and have wholesome lives and families without being shot to death in front of them. They should not be made to live like this.
But there is another, you mentioned the cognitive dissonance, and I only know the polls for Germany and Austria, but maybe you can enlighten us whether it's similar in the UK. Now, particularly in urban areas, the demographic that votes most regularly for left-wing, liberal, pro-open borders, pro-migration parties are single women under the age of 30. But every other poll shows when you ask these women, so do they feel safe? Do they feel safe when they go out at night? Do they feel that they can go home, unmolested? In Austria, I know the exact number, 75% say no. So what's this kind of cognitive dissonance? You mentioned the blank slate, but I think this might dovetails nicely with this issue. What is it with particularly young women that at the same time that they say, I feel less safe, this is not how it was before, I'm afraid of becoming a victim of sexual violence, but yet then they always vote for the parties that make this more and not less likely? How can we explain this? What's going on there?
The polling says that half of young women in London feel unsafe going out during the day or night. And at the same time, there is still a plurality of young women who are not only voting for the Labour Party, but they're voting for the Green Party or Jeremy Corbyn's new Islamist left alliance, Jezbollah, as it has been nicknamed.
Yeah.
I know this is very much the case, of course, in Germany, where young women are the most likely to be sexually assaulted, especially by the growing number of foreign men from parts of the world where sexual assault isn't even a crime. Like in Britain, it's Afghanistan and Eritrea that lead the rapey migrant league tables. None of those men ever need to be here. Every single life ruined by a sexual assault is a consequence of government policy. They should be expelled effective immediately. But in Germany, young women voted 25 points more than the average for Die Linke, literally the Communist Party.
Precisely.
Whereas, young men only voted 4 points more than average for the AfD. And the AfD are remarkably moderate despite the demonization they receive. Right? So I am quite pessimistic. I think what has happened here is, and I don't wish to be disparaging, again, it's not all women. You've met my wife and she's lovely. She doesn't think like this. However, there is a large number of women, and I think this is part of the reason they stay single, is because they have not got wholesome relationships with men in their lives. They don't understand sexual difference. They believe in the blank slate. They think that actually all of the problems of inequality and violence are a result of prejudice, which is driving people to commit these crimes. Zoe Williams wrote this in The Guardian, actually. She said that the protests outside of a migrant hotel in Epping, after the Ethiopian who had arrived in the country 8 days earlier had attempted to sexually assault a 14-year-old, of which he has now been convicted. It's that migrants only commit crime because these protests had happened. Bear in mind the sexual assault happened before the protests. The protests happened as a direct result of the sexual assault, but they believe, yet again, that assimilation is only prevented by you noticing differences between people.
So it's again separate realities, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's entirely that. And so this cognitive dissonance prevents many women, from drawing the conclusion that dumping men from the third world, where women and children are mistreated as property and chattel, into your country will result in their unsafeness. They don't draw it, and it's because many women extend compassion, which should be reserved for babies and toddlers at the stage in their lives where they would be having them, to grown men who have a higher propensity for violence than the men in their own countries. And because the men in their own countries have had access to the same liberal education that they believe they've benefited from, they hold a higher standard of behavior to those men, white, European, Christian men specifically, and they hold lower expectations for men from other parts of the world. And they believe that if those white Christian men just lower the flags of their own countries, self-flagellate, and provide a few more classes on women's rights and consent to the men from the other parts of the world that do not see women as equal human beings, then everything will be fine. Everyone will be equal. Everyone will be equally peaceful. And it is delusional and deranged. And so what I think is going to happen from here on out, and I think this thought came to me when I was watching a video from the Charlie Kirk vigil, where a guy went by on a scooter shouting F Charlie Kirk, and then got into an altercation with a group, and then the group descended on him, beating him up, basically. There was one or two women in the background of that video yelling, "Stop, no, stop it." And the crowd didn't listen. And I think what's going to happen is, and I don't want any violence yet again, I must reiterate, I'm not calling for this. I'm merely predicting it if things do not change. Politics is going to get a very ugly place. Lots of women are distanced from the physical violence that they have been encouraging, especially in the aftermath of the death of Charlie Kirk, because they are not going to be the ones that are engaged in violence if some kind of armed conflict breaks out. When conflict breaks out, or the preventative action to prevent conflict from breaking out is carried out, for example, deportations, arrests, people going hungry because their leftist patronage networks have been dried up, women need to constrain their instinct to occasionally spend the currency and compassion in places that it is not warranted. Because giving compassion to the vicious is a cruelty to the innocent. And you should reserve your compassion and your protective instincts, which we love and cherish as part of sexual difference. You should reserve it for the innocent who deserve it, which are children, the sick, the needy, and those who have fallen on hard times through no fault of their own. Do not give it to demented leftist activists who want you and your loved ones dead.
You just mentioned the metaphorical flag, and it's a nice segue to the actual flag. Over the weekend, there was the United Kingdom rally. I think organized, it's fair to say, by Tommy Robinson. There were many prominent speakers. There are debates whether it was millions of participants or a mere 110,000. I guess I would assume from the pictures I saw it was somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000. But again, I relegate to you what your take on this is. But what can you tell us about this rally, and what do you think does it stand for? Is it a flash in the pan? Is it the beginning of something bigger? What do you make of it?
So I wasn't in attendance. I was actually helping my granddad lay some flooring. But the estimates I've seen have been anywhere between 500,000 and 1 million. I think that's reasonable. It's certainly the largest one that's happened so far. I think it's the fourth consecutive one. And there were fears that Robinson's presence after getting out of prison, the scale of the rally, and the counter demonstrations from Stand Up to Racism, the Socialist Workers' Party, pro-Palestine activists, and the like would cause violence. And mercifully, despite the scale of the demonstrations, I think there are only 8 people charged overall for getting in scuffles with police and other minor offences. Now, I wish that was 0, of course, but unfortunately, as I learned at the Charlie Kirk rally that I attended on the Friday night before in London, there are some people that show up to these things already drunk and looking for trouble. So at Charlie's rally, I don't want to say, I won't say who these people were, but there were a few lads that showed up already a few cans of Stella deep, drinking, shouting, "Oh, Tommy, Tommy." And I had to turn around and go, "Knock it off, save it for tomorrow," because it's just disrespectful. This is not the place. And so there are some people that just don't know how to behave in public settings, and unfortunately, they give the rest of the movement a bad name. However, the overwhelming majority of people were peaceful. They were patriotic. There were women, children, and the elderly there waving their flags. There was very little, if any trouble. And the other side were vindictive, demented, state-funded communists who actually made the peaceful patriotic protesters look even better. And if they feel uncomfortable seeing English people being a majority in their city for once, because London, bear in mind, is less than a third English, if they are uncomfortable seeing the flags being waved, if, as Stephen Edgington is about to report for GB News, the Home Office held therapy circles about the Operation Raise the Colours and Unite the Kingdom rally, saying that their employees felt unsafe. If you feel uncomfortable with peaceful demonstrations of patriotism by the indigenous host majority of this country, find a new job or find a new country to live in.
Yeah.
We are sick to death of these people. And what it shows is that we are still the majority in this country. It shows that all the attempts to make the ringleaders of various movements into bogeymen, despite your potential disagreements with their tactics or their politics on niche issues, they do not work for the vast majority of people. And I think this is very important because even though, again, I didn't attend, I wasn't involved in the organising, I think it's very important because it showed to the likes of Reform UK, who are riding high in the polls, but don't feel confident about their position yet, that they don't need to play into the hands of their enemies. Until now, Nigel Farage had felt pressure to denounce elements of his base. Richard Tice had written all of the Unite the Kingdom marches off as that lot in an infamous interview on GB News.
I think Mark Stein said he can no longer say that lot. He has to say that's a lot because it were so many people that showed up.
Well, he has to say that's all my voters. Reform got 4 million votes at the last election. If there were really 1 million people there, almost all of them would have voted for Reform. Yeah. That's a quarter of your voter base at the last election. You can't denounce all those people as fascists and racists and the alt-right, as he called us. And I say us there because he was denigrating the online right, of which I have been disparaged as a member. And look, I'm hoping Reform lives up to its potential. And there was an encouraging sign that they will do because of the Unite the Kingdom rally. Because when multiple journalists asked Nigel Farage to pick a fight with Elon Musk and denounce Tommy Robinson and call everyone attending the Unite the Kingdom rally racist, he did exactly what Donald Trump did in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's shooting. And he said, I'm not doing both sides here. I'm not going to sit here and denounce men who, even themselves, Robinson and Musk, have a personal problem with Farage thinking he is too soft. And they have insulted him in kind. He, for once, took the high ground and said, I'm not going to roll around in the mud and punch people on my side to the benefit of people who would like to see Reform capsize and lose rather than succeed and govern effectively. Instead, what about all the women you make feel unsafe with your immigration policy? What about all the Jews that have lived here for hundreds of years that you make feel unsafe because Sadiq Khan empowers Islamists marching through the streets chanting Intifada and From the River to the Sea every week since October the 7th? What about all the times that you've demonized me and called me a fascist and a Nazi, just as you did to Charlie Kirk and get my friend killed? Because he's known Charlie for over 10 years, and it really affected him. So I think that the Unite the Kingdom rally was effective in showing that Reform UK is morally legitimate in pursuing the mandate that was given to them at the last election when they went from 0 MPs to 5. And unfortunately, they lost some MPs along the way. They're back up to 5 now through the defection of Danny Kruger. I hope they take this and are as bold as the country already wants them to be, and as they are absolutely righteous in being. And just as there is a leadership vacuum to fill with the death of Charlie Kirk in America, I think they now need to bring more people in, more talent into the coalition that aren't just Tories fleeing a sinking ship and making Reform into a refugee camp. I think they need to treat with the online right. I think there needs to be a rapprochement with lots of young talent who they have left on the table so far, because there are lots of people who would make competent policymakers, future MPs, councillors, advisors, and the like that Reform should be bringing into the coalition, because they should be Britain's MAGA. They have this one-in-a-generation opportunity, and I don't necessarily think Nigel Farage needs to go and address the United Kingdom rallies, but to not denounce it is a big step, and having some kind of friendly correspondence between all the corners of the right, who are non-violent, who are patriotic, who just want their country back, will be the way that they win in 2029 and become Trump term 2 rather than Trump term 1.
I mean, this is, as you just said, I mean, if you have a movement that is a grassroots movement that speaks to the values that your new political party is also supposedly representing, I mean, you would be crazy not to combine forces. As you said, it doesn't mean that they have to speak at the rally, but they have to ensure that those 500,000-600,000 people that showed up, that every one of them who goes to the polls, goes to vote, votes for them. I mean, otherwise it would be political suicide, wouldn't it?
Yes, and the rally itself coded Advance UK because, of course, Tommy Robinson has now joined Ben Habib's new party. Ben Habib has crossed the threshold of 30,000 members to establish itself as a new party. And so even though there are lots of people there who will not vote for Advance, they will still vote for Reform because they think via pure political pragmatism, Reform are the most likely vehicle to disrupt the Uniparty. Reminder, there are still people there that are voting UKIP, for example. And UKIP, Farage basically tanked UKIP's chances, kind of like farting in a lift as he left and shut the doors behind him a long time ago. And Nick Tenconi helped run TP UK. I've met him a few times. He seems like a good Christian man, but I don't see UKIP as a viable political vehicle at the moment. I see lots of probably good people that are involved in supporting it, but they're not close to taking power like Reform are. And I think Advance UK is in that position equally at the moment. Now, they could siphon off if the Unite the Kingdom rally attendants all decided to pledge their loyalties to Robinson's preferred political party, as they pledged their loyalty to Robinson and come out for the rally. And make no mistake, it was Tommy Robinson's rally. Yeah. But the people that I spoke to that asked me who were coming, who aren't involved in frontline politics, who, I had a guy doing some pipe work the other week that asked if I was going, and he didn't even know who I was, but he knew it was Tommy Robinson's event. If Tommy Robinson can command that loyalty in the same way Nigel Farage can, if he is to reroute hundreds of thousands, possibly 1 million votes to Advance UK, that might win Advance UK a seat at the next election, like it did with Reform UK, but it will split the right-wing vote. And so rather than cause further division and bad blood, as happened with personal fallouts between, Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage, or Ben Habib and Nigel Farage, ugly disputes, which I wish wouldn't have happened because both are very good men, they need to be ensuring that they are the credible vehicle for the necessary patriotic revolt against the treacherous Uniparty that we only have one chance to pull off. Like, I don't think we have 10 years. I barely even think we have 5. Yeah. We have got one shot by 2029 to do this. And if the right is fragmented because of petty squabbles or the inability to take opportunities as they are presented, then truly I am pessimistic about the fate of my country.
Do you think that's maybe one of the biggest potential problems? That you have these movements, you have these individuals who understand very well what the British public is, but for personality reasons, maybe for lack of a better term, they cannot unify the power that they would potentially have. As I said, it's petty squabbles, it's like weird infighting that somebody threatened to punch somebody else, and then one person leaves the party, starts a new movement, and that's all fine and dandy if you have plenty of time. But I completely agree with you, and I think the situation is the same in many other Western countries as well. We don't have another 10 years. Where we can continue the path we're on and say, and then maybe in 10 years when the right gets their act together, then they will storm the metaphorically speaking, right? They will storm the ballots and we'll get into power. It will be too late by then. So do you think it's also a personality issue and not so much an issue, but a personality issue?
Yes, and I don't want to diminish the severity and the immorality of how Rupert Lowe was treated, because, reminder, Zia Yusuf called the police on him, and that means he would have rather that he was charged with false incitements to violence and threats against his life than be seen as a threat to Nigel Farage's leadership, which is just a demented weaponization of the law against speech by the anti-woke party. They've damaged their credibility with that a little bit. But I think the approach that Rupert's taken is very healthy. And I think that everyone has a place in the ecosystem. You know, the anons of a place, the furthest fringes have their place, even though I think they nip at the heels of those with our face to things a bit too much. All of the respective parties have their place. The people that are doing the quiet work of writing policy or, you know, advising politicians and picking candidates have their place. All of these things are very valuable. And something like a Restore Britain that my friends are involved with has their place in sweeping minds and making more room to maneuver in the Overton window than just becoming a brand new political party that then eats up a vanishing share of the vote on the right, makes it a crowded market. And I think that's very valuable. And so I think what people need to do, especially in light of Charlie's death, is find their place in the ecosystem, do one job and do it really, really well. So, for example, I'm sure you've had this, Ralph, of where being a public figure, you get asked to immediately become a politician. And I won't speak for any of your future career ambitions. However, I have no interest in taking the parliamentary whip because I know I will be expelled from the green benches on day one by being unable to hold my tongue or speak a party line. I'm just not cut out for it. And that's fine. I know what I'm cut out for. I'm cut out for writing and reporting and shaping the ecosystem in which politicians operate. And I think that is totally fine. I know other people that are going to be more than capable politicians that probably aren't as good on broadcast media as me, and they don't need to be. That's fine. I think if we all don't step on each other's toes, we don't start jostling for egos, and we don't treat our political side like a high school lunch table, we will get somewhere. The only thing I will say is that there are always going to be, in a political movement with momentum, people with antisocial personality traits attracted to it. And I would just say that if we don't want to promote the people who have vicious lifestyles, as in they are devoid of virtue, that they succumb to vice. Charlie Kirk being the perfect example of a man who he practiced what he preached. He was moral, he was upstanding, and so he didn't have any bad lifestyle habits getting in the way of the mission. The Conservative Party, before, it used to be joked that it was a sexual blackmail ring with a party attached, right? Loads of them were taking drugs, loads of them were cheating on their wives, not all with women. And so we don't want that in any political movement, regardless of the party. And what is encouraging is to see a bunch of virtuous young men who are returning to Christianity, who are getting married, who are laying down their roots, who are reading a hell of a lot, and who are unapologetic crusaders for the truth and for restoring their country to the state that it once was and should still be, because we don't have to live like this. And all I would say is I would encourage existing political parties and movements to open their doors to them, to cultivate young talent, and to, as Trump did with J.D. Vance, seek successors and raise them within the castle walls rather than them having them bang on the drawbridge, afraid of falling in the moat.
No, I think that's a wonderful note to end. I kept you longer than I originally planned, but it was absolutely worth it. I apologize for cutting even more into it than I anticipated. Connor Tomlinson, thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to having you on again.
It's a pleasure, sir. See you soon.